and welcome to the lecture on style. Now, this was subtitled, not by me, I hasten to add, How to Have It in Debate. Scrub that bit out, okay? I cannot tell you what your good style is. Only you can decide that for yourself. Trying to define exactly what a good style for debate is a little bit like trying to nail an omelette to a paper plate. Okay? It's really difficult. It's not a very productive act even if you're successful. And at the end of it, you're going to have half a thing here and half a thing there, and it's just going to be a bit of a mess. Right? So we want to try and avoid that. And this is why we repeat that when you're watching other people speak, and this is what Alex was very good at on Saturday night when he was introducing the debate, watch good debaters, don't try and copy them. Pick one or two things that you think might work for you, and then try to bring those into your speech. But only focus on one or two things at a time. That's the first thing. If you try to change your entire demeanour, or be something you're not, people will spot it very, very quickly. I'm very lucky in the sense that I'm not just a debater. I'm also qualified as a lawyer, as an advocate, so I practice advocacy skills all the time. And before I ever became a lawyer, I trained as an actor. I graduated from the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. But I was also very fortunate in that my mother went to school with Anthony Hopkins, a rather brilliant Welsh actor who plays Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. And so when I was going up to drama school, and I was speaking to Uncle Tony, as I like to call him, I said to him, what is the secret of great acting? He said, it's simple, Rhydian. No great mystery about it. He said, the key to great acting is sincerity. Once you can fake being sincere, you can fake anything at all. Such is the way with style. Style, in a debate context, is nothing more or less than a synonym for confidence. Confidence is style. Okay? There are different manners in which you can speak, some of which will work for you and some of which won't. Again, nobody should really tell you how to speak. If you discover for yourselves the way you are most comfortable, the way you're most comfortable standing, the way you're most comfortable moving, the way you are most comfortable gesturing, the way you are most comfortable modulating your voice as we talked about yesterday, that will be the right style for you. And everybody should have their own style, ultimately. There's nothing worse for a judge than to see debaters who appear to have come off some Henry Ford-like production line of the Cambridge Union style of debate or something. It works for some of them very, very well, and those are the Cambridge debaters that go on to be very, very successful. But not every Cambridge debater fits that little mould. And the ones who are less confident in themselves simply ape the mannerisms and the quirks of other debaters. There are one or two that, where it's become a real sort of crutch. It's something they do when they speak. One of the best debaters I've ever seen in terms of content analysis is an Estonian chap called Alan Poole. Brilliant, brilliant debater. Looks like he's playing basketball when he debates though. Stands there like this, constantly. And it's fine when there's a podium in front of him because you can't see what he's doing. But if you stand there like this, and I do this all the way through this elective, most of you aren't really going to listen to what I'm saying, are you? Because I'd be a bit distracted by the fact that I appear to be bouncing in a miserable ball. I am. I find it distracting and I know what I'm doing. Right? The whole point is, audiences will look for the path of least effort. And the path of least effort to the audience is not paying attention to you lot at all. Anything you do that gives them an excuse to stop paying attention to your content is bad style. Right? It's probably better if we don't talk about style, if we talk about manner. Then we can divide quite comprehensively the matter of our speech and the manner of our speech. Okay? The matter is your content. It is what you say. Manner is everything else. Everything that you do that is not your content is part of your style, in essence. Okay? So today we're going to talk a little bit about the breakdown of communication, how people communicate in the real world, where most of our communication is carried, how we can practice and control things like movement, breathing, gestures, all those sorts of things. I won't do too much on breathing because that's the focus of yesterday's lecture. But how we can concentrate and focus on those things to find what works for us to make us the most confident we can be when we stand up and speak. So we can hold the audience's attention. Okay? The audience's attention is like a small child. If you don't watch it closely, it will wander off and get lost. And it will wander off in as many different directions as there are audience members, and you can't pull them all back in one go. Okay? So you have to do as much as you can to hold their attention from the very beginning. Right. When does the debate start?
When you walk into the room.
Absolutely right. When you walk into the room. Okay? Everything you do from that moment on is communication. With the judges, with the opposing teams, with the lot. I've seen teams win debates by walking into the room. Because they walk in, set their place, pull their seats out, they sit down, and you just look at them and go, God, these guys are on the wall. They know what they are doing. Half the battle right there. Anybody ever read Sun Tzu's The Art of War? Okay. Strategic thinking applies just as much in debate. Okay? Location of the battlefield is important. Knowledge of your opponent is important. Do not do what you wish to do. Do what your opponent least wishes you to do. Okay? All those sorts of things start the moment you cross the threshold. People forget that. Judges forget that. We pretend in debate world that we are not affected by the same irrational heuristics and biases as ordinary people. I don't know why we pretend that, because we are ordinary people. We're not super analysis machines. If we were, we'd just pump all the data into computers and let the computer decide which argument was better. Right? We wouldn't bother debating at all. The whole point of human communication is that it's human, not just that it's communication. Looking at the breakdown of communication, what carries our communicative message, does anybody know? There have been numerous studies done over the last 50 or 60 years regarding where we draw our message from in terms of body language, facial expressions, gestures, the sounds we hear, and then the actual words we hear. Does anybody know what the figures of those studies tend to reproduce? They all come out with similar 80% body language. Yeah, between 65 and 80. I've seen a split of 65-35, and that's okay. I've seen them as high as 80-20 in favour of body language. The usual figure that we kind of, when we average them all out, is in the low 70s. Around 72-73% of what we interpret from a message comes from non-oral communication. Okay? And I say non-oral rather than non-verbal for a specific reason. So only 27% of our communication are the sounds that you are making. Right? Within that 27%, how much do you think is actually verbal? That is, the words that you say rather than just the sound of your voice. It can be as low as that. It can be as high as 8. Right? So of that 27%, around 20% of it is simply the cadence of my voice, the intonation, the inflection, the accent, the pace and the volume at which I speak. The fact that I smile occasionally, it lightens my tone, and you all smile back when I do. I don't know how that works. It's called priming in psychological circles. Smiles are great primes. When people are smiling, they're more likely to believe what they're hearing. Did you know that? If ever you're doing stand-up comedy at the talent show tonight, before you start, ask everyone to put a pencil in their mouths, and they'll automatically smile. They'll find your jokes funny. It's absolutely true. Scary how easy we are to manipulate on that level. But only 7% or so, maximum, is the actual words we say. Now that might not correlate with what we find in debate. Because in normal communication, people don't sit down and take notes of everything you say and then go and look at them afterwards, right? But do you think any judge really can write down every single word you say? If they can, they're not going to be looking at you very much. So they're not going to be looking at your mannerisms and your gestures and your body language. They're going to feel a disconnect from you because they're going to have no eye contact. So the likelihood is that whilst they are noting things down, they're putting things down in note form. They are unconsciously making judgments about what to include in those notes. The bits that you tell them are important are the bits they're going to write down. But you can't waste your time going, Judge, this bit's important, please pick up your pen now. Right? You have to impress upon them through body language, through using your voice, through marrying all that to your content, which is the most important aspect, and which are the bits that they can not switch off, but gloss over when it comes to analysing your overall performance. Right. Body language. What is body language? We all know that there are basic rules to body language. If I stand like that, what does that mean? Why? Yeah, I'm closing myself off. Right? Same as if I do that. For some people, it's just the natural way they sit, but the standard implication is that it closes you off, it stops you being an open person. Sitting with your arms like that, it's much more open. Okay? And it does have an effect on the way most people, and this won't be true for everybody, but the way most people in an audience perceive you. Which is why, when I start electives, usually the first thing I do is this. There we go, now it's just me, no barrier. It's why I often don't speak from notes, and I don't need a table or a podium. There's a physical barrier between me and you. Isn't that good? Simple little things like that matter. One thing I try not to do, not only when I'm being filmed, but one thing I try not to do, is I try not to move about too much when I'm talking. Because a lot of body language is unconscious. A lot of body language we do because we're not comfortable when we're standing still. Do you know, I spent 3 months at Lambda learning how to stand still. 3 months of classes on standing still. Because an actor is only standing still when he's actually standing still. You look at the number of times somebody thinks they're standing still and they'll be doing something like that. Or they'll be, there's a little itch over there, the trouser doesn't feel quite right there, a bit of a scratch on the back. There's always something going on. It's what is called, in theatrical terms, business. It's what makes us look natural when we're not the ones speaking. Because if we all stood like this every time it was someone else's turn to speak, that would probably be the worst play ever. So we have to do these little things to look natural. The consequence is that these are the little things that make you invisible, that make you blend in, right? That's the opposite of what you want when you're the speaker, and you are the grand rhetor, to use the Greek term. And you know that rhetoric comes from the Greek for public speaker. Rhetor, that's all it means, speaker, in ancient Greek. So when you are the grand rhetor, you want to imagine yourself not the bit actor doing business at the side, a Shakespearean hero. Chest swells with pride. Your physical presence increases. Your movements become much more measured. If I take a walk over here, because I want to address this particular part of my audience, I might stop over here for a while, rather than just straight away walking back. People who sort of do this aren't really doing it to address the audience, are they? They're just doing it because they don't like standing still. And once again, just like my friend Alan with his invisible basketball, this is now not enhancing what I'm saying at all. This is now quite distracting, even though I'm just walking very slowly. Because unconsciously, you're not listening to the words I say, you're not thinking, why is he walking like that? There's got to be some purpose to what he's doing. This guy is switched on, he's on the ball, he's in control of his material. So there must be something about why he's walking around in this random fashion. And all your cognitive effort is going to determining what that is, rather than listening to the words I'm saying. So when I want you to pay attention, it's better off if I'm still. Now the best way to stand, for almost anybody, is not like this. If anybody's seen the episode of Blackadder where the actor's come to teach the prince how to speak, your Shakespearean hero, sir, stands like this. No, he doesn't. That's insane. Right? Balance is what matters. Everybody knows that if you sit on your hip, if I do that, what's the effect? What's the impression I give if I sit on one hip?
Casual.
Yeah, I'm resting, right? I stand, my feet approximately shoulder width apart. Very, very easy. Very, very simple. Standing at ease, but still forming. There's a reason why in the army, when you're asked to stand at ease, standing at ease is with your feet shoulder width apart. Don't stand up for me. Stand with your feet absolutely right tight together. Okay? Now gesture with your arms. How odd does that feel? No? Okay. Now move your feet really far apart. Move your arms about. Now stand with your feet shoulder width apart. Move your arms about. You should feel a difference in that your upper arms are freer when you're in line with your shoulders. Because if you're too tight, your arms get pulled in. If you're too wide, they get pulled out. But your gestures are much more natural and much easier when your feet are shoulder width apart. Okay, everybody sit. The other thing is, the moment you stand with your feet very close together, you should feel, just at the bottom of your buttocks and the tops of your haunches, the muscle there gets very tight, very, very quickly. Most people start to find that uncomfortable after a couple of minutes. Equally, when I do that, it's here that I'm putting the pressure on. This is where the muscles are getting tighter, and down here in the calves. Now that's great for firming up your muscles, but if that's what you want to do, don't do it during a debate, right? Have that as a separate activity. I mean, at debate can, fine, but not actually during the debate. If you stand with your feet shoulder width apart, I guarantee you that for 80–90% of you, that will be the position in which you can stand still for the longest without putting any strain on any one muscle set. The only thing you might find is if you don't move, you have a little strain in your lower back, just here. That's to do with posture. Okay? So push your shoulders back, pull your stomach in, make sure your back is as straight as it can be, and you can hold that position quite comfortably for a very long time. It's also the position that allows us to breathe most naturally on the diaphragm. Right? This lovely muscle here just at the bottom of the sternum. The one that should control all your breathing. Those of you that were in my elective yesterday will know the importance of breathing properly from the diaphragm. For projecting the voice, so that you fill the room without shouting, but also for punctuating your speech. Okay? If you're not breathing correctly, you're not punctuating the speech correctly, you're not giving clear meaning to what you say. Shakespeare is the best example of this. Literature that is written in iambic pentameter. You need to breathe correctly just to make sense of the words. If you don't breathe in the right places, it's nonsense. Okay? Most famous speech that Shakespeare ever wrote, the to be or not to be soliloquy in Hamlet, you can race through it at a 10,000 miles an hour kind of pace, breathing when you need to rather than when you should. And you can get to the end of it quite quickly and nobody will have a clue what it's about. To be or not to be, that's the question, whether it's nobler in the minds of some of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing enemy, to die sleep by sleep, save the end of troubles, thousand shots to the flesh is not collected. She's consummation devoutly to be wished, I sleep, dream I, there's a rope in that sleep of death, and knows what she will come, when we shall off this mortal coil, etc., etc., etc. You lose all sense of the meaning just because you're running to the end. I know several debaters who don't speak quite that quickly, but when they speak in the debate, they noticeably quicken from when they're talking naturally, right? Because nerves take over, because we're not breathing properly, because we're not standing properly, we panic a little bit. We've got all this data we need to get out. We've got to take a POI, we've got to keep an eye on the top. The brain is being pulled in 7 different directions at once. The cognitive strain that we experience is extreme. That's why, after 3 days of a debate tournament, you will feel knackered. You will feel exhausted. If you don't, you haven't been doing it properly. Mental effort takes almost as much out of you as physical effort. Given that you're going to speak extemporaneously for 7 minutes, that's the equivalent in speaking terms for most people of running a marathon. So you need to prepare yourself for that physical exertion. Let's revisit the Hamlet speech with proper breathing. You all know Hamlet, right? You know the story and things like that. This speech is the crux of the entire play. Is it better to allow things to happen to you and be the passive receiver of those influences, or should we, even if it means our death, fight against things that we think are wrong? To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind, is it better for me to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing them? To die, to sleep, and by a sleep to say we will end those shocks, the thousand heartaches that flesh is natural heir to. Is consummation devoutly to be wished? Suddenly the meaning becomes much clearer, because the breathing punctuates the words and allows the meaning of them to sink in. The same is true of your debate speech. You are presenting a lot, if you're doing it right, to an audience that hasn't heard this material before. You're giving them data, you're setting up problems, you're providing solutions that you hope will work, but most important, you're analysing for your audience exactly why all of this matters. They have to be able to take in everything you're saying before your content can be given any weight at all. Okay? Never think that being a stylish speaker will be enough. If you've got no content, you've got no content. You can't ever hide that fact. The way I like to think of it is a simple aphorism. All good matter should be well mannered. But if all you have is manner, what you say will never matter. Right? There's got to be some element of both. But I think to a large degree we are guilty of underestimating the impact of the way we say things on our audience, particularly in debates, because we have this assumption of super-rationality, hyper-rationality in judges, which may not exist. I'm pretty confident in asserting that it probably doesn't, given that they're also human beings. Right? So the way we stand affects the way we're able to breathe. The way we move should, as far as possible, seem quite natural. When the pace of my speech is quite languid and quite gentle, because what I'm saying is quite gentle, then my movements and my gestures marry very closely to that. Okay? Debaters who are nervous are the ones who we say have bad style. But that's not really what we mean. What we mean is that their nerves come through. Right? Imagine you're on an aeroplane. Imagine we're all on an aeroplane. I'm the captain, Captain Morgan. Okay? I'm coming over the public address system. You're settled in your seats. Just come on. And you would expect to hear something like, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking, Captain Morgan. I'm in charge of this Boeing 737 aircraft today. Our flight time will be 4 hours, 15 minutes. We'll be flying mostly at an altitude of 28,000 feet. Weather reports for our destination today are good. We expect a little bit of turbulence, but don't worry. You sit back, enjoy the flight, and I'll have you at your destination. No time at all." That's what you expect to hear, yeah? What's the effect if I say, "Hello, I'm your captain. I'm really excited to be flying this big war plane, because I love planes. We're going to go really high in the sky, and we're going to have a lovely time, I hope. I really don't know. It could be all bumpy, you know, scary turbulence happens, but I'm sure we'll get there, and we'll probably get there in one piece. So sit back and enjoy it. Anybody want to get off the plane?" I would be amazed if there was not an exodus rushing for every available exit, right? I'd be like, why have they let a children's television presenter fly a plane? This man knows nothing. I have no faith in his ability. Similarly, if your doctor comes in to you and says, "Got some really bad news for you. Afraid the tests are in and you have AIDS." And you're like, "Doctor, why are you smiling?" "Oh, well, I thought, you know, to make the bad news better." "No, doctor, it makes you look like a psychopath." Gestures and facial expressions probably carry much more of the communication in a debate sense than your actual movement does. Movement, as I said, is mostly a distraction. You can use it when necessary because you might want to address particular sections of your audience to form that empathic connection. Your gestures and your facial expressions should very closely map the content of what you're saying. I had one debater who was incredibly nervous because he just didn't think people liked him. That's kind of a hard thing. They just don't like me, so I don't know what to do, so I said, well, have you tried smiling at people? And he went like this. Oh, no, never like that. That does not say like me, that says I would like to be a serial killer. That's not a good idea. And I said, but you understand that why people smile back when you smile at them. If you've got a genuine smile, and you keep looking at somebody, it's really hard for them not to smile back. Because it's a natural emotive response. It's called the empathic connection. People buy into people before they ever buy into the ideas that they have to sell. That's why in dictatorships you see so many pictures of just the face of the dear leader. Because that actually makes people like the dear leader more. It's not a big brother is watching you thing. We know that familiarity breeds acceptance. Numerous studies at the University of Michigan have proved this. When people are confronted with unfamiliar things, simple exposure to those things leads us to believe that they are positives, and if we're not exposed to them, we believe they are negatives. Smiles work in the same way. They are great primers. So I taught this kid how to write. He had quite a nice smile when he wasn't trying. And his eyes lit up. And I was like, right, when you walk into the room, nod and smile pleasantly, not creepily, pleasantly at the judges. And he said, fine. And then he carried on smiling and started his speech and told the judges that there was a very serious problem with the Rwandan genocide. And everybody in the room was like, stop smiling now, don't smile when you say the word genocide. It's not a good word to smile on. The discord that you create means, and the way our brains are structured means, that we don't hear the word genocide properly when somebody says it with a smile. We're freaked out by the fact that this person is smiling. Okay? So we start to dismiss things that they're saying. The actual content of his speech was pretty good. Delivered with a smile, it was probably the worst speech I've ever heard. Because it wasn't a topic that you could smile about. Most topics in debate aren't that funny. Debaters who think they are funny are worst. Right? Some people are naturally funny. Some people naturally find humour in situations. If you can't tell jokes, don't. Okay? There's nothing worse in stylistic terms than the debater bounding up, thinking, oh, I've got a cracker here, delivering the punchline, and then it's just like... So the tumbleweed goes across the desk and everybody looks a little uncomfortable and down at their shoes. And then the debater goes, oh, that one didn't work, I better try again. No! Stop there. You know? Quit while you're behind, really. You cannot dig yourself up out of a hole, so stop digging. Humour works if you are a funny person, but don't conflate humour with style. Okay? Very often, we use humour to mask a lack of serious content. True satire is great because it's not funny, it's angry. Right? Proper comedy, laugh out loud comedy, makes light of very serious situations. You might try that once or twice and find that it works within the context of a speech. To have it as a, this is how I become a stylish speaker because that Irish guy made everybody laugh, well, not a good idea. Okay? Some debate cultures are more accepting of jokes than others. Will Jones and I once did a tournament in Tokyo, in Japan. And we were asked to pick a team name, and we picked Captain Perry's Flotilla of Debate. And apparently that's not funny in Japan. Okay? We thought it was hilarious, you know. Do people know who Captain Perry was? He was the first Westerner to sort of break the isolation of Japan after the Tokugawa shogunate and things. And did it by forcibly sending a flotilla of armed ships along with trade ships. And basically saying you don't get to be isolated anymore. We thought, because we were coming from Oxford, that this was, you know, a hilarious joke on our imperialism. The Japanese just thought we were being imperialist. cultural dissonance between the message being sent and the message being received. Whenever there's a breakdown in communication, ladies and gentlemen, with technology, whenever something doesn't work and I tune into a channel and the program doesn't come through, the first thing I do is check other channels. If my other channels work, I assume it's a problem in transmission. I don't automatically assume that the BBC has gone bust. And I don't automatically assume that my television doesn't work. I think there's probably a problem in the transmission somewhere. Why is it then, when we speak to someone and they don't hear exactly what we want me to, we think the receiver is the thing that's broken? Oh, that person didn't listen. Oh, that judge didn't hear what I said. The judge wasn't paying attention, because I definitely said that in the debate. Why do we always resort to that rationale rather than, did I transmit the message I wanted to? Did I actually send all the packets of data across? You know, in this kind of X25 frame relay kind of analogy. Was I actually making sure that the data was getting through to the end point? Was I checking the understanding of the judge as I was going along? Was I using non-verbal communication appropriately so that the judge knew when I was being serious, knew when I was being light-hearted? Facial expressions carry the vast majority of your non-oral communication in debate, because a lot of the time they'll be a podium. And some of you won't want to do what I do, which is put the podium to one side and sort of free-form across the stage. A lot of you won't want to go through a 7-minute speech without having your notes in front of you. And if you've got your notes in front of you, free-form across the stage looks weird, because you've got one hand of notes and you're constantly trying to look at them as you're moving, right? Then, a podium. But again, I move to the side of the podium and I keep my booklet on it. I kind of rest on it like that. Anything that makes me that little bit different to what the judges are used to, if everybody's behind the podium, I don't want to be. If nobody's behind the podium, I want to be. I want to stand out a little bit, but I don't want to stand out too much. So there are parameters within which my gestures operate. Hand gestures are also important. I've been using them while I've been talking to you. Most people in Europe find it natural to talk in some way with their hands. What I don't want you to do is look like an Italian trying to catch a mosquito with chopsticks, okay? So you get some people, they just seem to have random tics rather than gestures. And I worry about epilepsy medication rather than their arguments, okay? You don't want your hands to become these things that you don't know what to do with, right? And lots of people have this thing, but the hands just seem to go haywire, and it seems like they're disconnected from everything that's being said, and they just move in various ways, and it doesn't really matter, there's no kind of congruence between the way they're moving. It's like somebody trying to do bad sign language on television. You know that little person who appears in the corner for the deaf people? Imagine if they were drunk one night and just making it up. That's what most debaters' hand gestures end up looking like. Or you get my friend Alan and his invisible basketball. You get James Acton, an incredibly intelligent man, now works as an advisor on nuclear policy for the UK government. That's how brilliant Jim is. Former president of the Cambridge Union. Had a very particular, very dogmatic style of speaking. And this sort of gesture worked very well, because you could be forceful with it, or you could be gentle. But it was constant. And then James became the trainer at the Cambridge Union. And everybody looked like they were playing invisible pianos when they spoke, because they just did this backwards and forwards. And I kept looking for the puppets that were missing off the end of their fingers. Anything that makes me think, why aren't there puppets on your fingers, is probably bad style in a debate. Because I shouldn't be thinking, why aren't there puppets on the end of your fingers, right? That means I've been distracted a long way from where I should be, which is listening to your material. You could go to the other extreme and say, well, there are probably only 4 gestures you ever need to make in a debate, particularly if you're standing behind a podium. Welcome, point, building on that point, conclusion. There you go. And then you can use welcome to thank people as well. I think that's probably a little bit restrictive. I know some coaches who don't like debaters doing any more than that, because they want to coach them out of using their hands. In training sessions, if you know, or if your partner says you're a little bit, handy, try doing this. Not so you can play with yourselves, gentlemen. I see some of you looking that way. I mean, just keep your hands out of the way. For years, I used to speak with one hand in my pocket because I didn't know what to do with this hand. I could gesture quite well with one hand. I could talk about things over here, and on the other hand, things over here. And this hand would just be kind of here, doing nothing. I don't like the left-hand side of my body. I've got a strange sort of psychological thing about it. I don't feel like it's mine sometimes. I'm not at the point where I only get dressed with one sleeve and one trouser leg. But some people do, that exists. There are some people for whom the concept of left or the concept of right simply doesn't exist. I genuinely feel at times that this is in my arm, but we're not going to go into why. Okay? But I do find it much more natural, much more comfortable to talk like this. I feel very, very in control of my movements when I stand like this. Some people, may have been a teacher in high school, may have told you should never have your hand in your pocket when you're talking to somebody, particularly in a formal situation. If it works for you, it works for you. I had judges who didn't like it in the beginning. Eventually they just got, well, that's just the way Rhydian talks. It helps them to focus on my content, so they accept it as my style. Now, I've got to the stage where I can do things, but I try to keep my hands almost as if there's an invisible ball of energy. I don't like to get them too far apart. I don't like to get them too close together because I'll squash them all. It means that when I move my one hand, the other hand moves with it. So I talk about things on one side and things on the other side of the debate. I can bring people into my ideas. I can talk about how things cohere very easily. Okay? I can encompass arguments. Each gesture is accompanying a word that it is somehow enhancing. If you think about the parallel with written communication, it's like me formatting my text to make it bold or italicized or capitalized, to make it stand out from the rest of the information. Okay? In the same way that in yesterday's lecture I talked about slowing down pace and altering tone to highlight sections to draw the judge's attention to what you're going to say. When I'm talking about data, my hands do move quite quickly. Because when I'm talking about data, the pace of what I'm saying is going more quickly, because I don't really want people to pay too much attention to statistical data. What I do want them to pay attention to, and this is where I get quite emphatic, is when I come to the analysis of that data. And the detail of that analysis, and my gestures get more detailed, like I'm picking out different things, then the judges go, oh yeah, this is the bit we should be writing down. When I quicken my pace and I quicken my gestures, I'm saying to the judges, this has got to be here, but you don't need to write it all down. This is just facts. Nobody wins a debate with facts. If you could win a debate with facts, again, you get punch cards with the relevant facts on, and we feed them into a machine, and the machine will decide which fact was better. That's not how we do it. So your gestures should be in keeping and marrying what you say, exactly the same as facial expressions. Orchestral conducting theory suggests that there are two very different types of audience. There are those who only like or who much prefer conductors who are incredibly flamboyant in their conducting of the orchestra. And the audience feels carried along with them if they can see all the movements. They know which part of the orchestra is being instructed. There are some who don't want that. There are some who think that orchestral conduction should happen in a sort of baseball batter's box. Okay? You know where the strike zone is? Sort of shoulder to hips and square. If you keep your gestures kind of in that imaginary square in front of you, they generally won't be too distracting. They will generally, for most people, and this is the rule we're following here with body language, is what works most of the time for most people. And as with most things, what works are things that are moderate. They're not extremely small and they're not extremely big, they're just right. It's the Goldilocks theory, if you like. It's not too hot, not too cold, it's just right. Okay? That's what we want to aim for, because you can't possibly know all the judges and all the audiences that you're going to encounter as debaters. Even those of you in sort of the little bubble of northeast US BP debating, where it's 5 or 6 schools that have 10 teams each and see each other all the time, you're going to come into some rooms where you just don't know the guy as well, or the woman in the chair. And you're going to have to guess what works for her. Far better if you don't have to waste time guessing and you know that your gestures are generally controlled. Whatever your gesture is, it shouldn't be unfinished, okay? You shouldn't do something with your hand and then your hand just kind of drifts and rolls off to one side. Because what you do with your gesture is implied in people's minds as what you do with your thought processes. Remember when we talk about getting rid of ers and ums and crutch words and things like that? I'm sure Alex and people do this with you in Cornell, right? The idea that if you say absolutely all the time rather than it actually meaning anything, it just becomes a distraction again. Or I'll say, obviously is the one I hate. Or obviously, Mr. Speaker, and I think, obviously? If this is obvious, why are you wasting time analysing it? And if it's not, why are you telling me that it is obvious? Either way, you're not really winning me over at the beginning of your speech if you start with obviously. Okay? It's a word that people use that has become an empty word. In the same way, gestures should be finer, they should be controlled, they should be definite. Okay? Don't, and if you have a chance when you are preparing later, I urge you to go onto YouTube and type in Republican candidate loses it. Okay? There's a guy from, I can't remember exactly where, and he's running for a local position in his local Republican Party, like treasurer of the party. And he starts to absolutely scream at the room. And he goes the colour of a blueberry by the end. And he's foaming at the mouth like he's been bitten by Cujo, right? It's out, and this is why I care! And this is why I want to be treasurer of the local Republican Party! You're like, dude. Like, even if you were going to be president of the world, that would still be too much emotion. But for treasurer of your local Republican Party in a small district, and I think it's somewhere like Virginia, right? Where there pretty much is only the Republican Party in operation. So you're not really looking for, the power broker and the we just want an accountant, really. We want a bean counter in that position, not somebody with all the passion of righteous fury. And he goes on and on about how the world is being destroyed by liberals, and it's like, really? Honestly, I mean, Todd Aitken and Paul Ryan would have taken a step back and gone, we think this guy's a bit extreme. And if they think you're a bit extreme, there's probably a problem with the way you're coming across, right? I'm compiling a list at the moment. It's called 25 Things Obama Could Have Done and Still Beaten Mitt Romney. And on there are lots of the things we ask debaters not to do in terms of good style. Because ultimately, good style is not noticeable. It's the same as good service in a restaurant. Truly good service in a restaurant, you don't see people doing it. When you need a glass of water, your water's already in the glass. You don't have to look around in the way. If we start noticing your style rather than your content, it's not a good style. You want your style to be so natural, so comfortable, you are so comfortable in your own skin that all we then care about is the arguments that you're presenting. And there's still room for you to express your style in those arguments, in formulations of phrases, as I've said, in gentle movement. But if I move like this occasionally, it doesn't really detract from anything I've told you, right? If I move constantly throughout the elective, it's a nightmare. Remember how our brains function. Most of us, if not all of us, think in two different ways. Okay, we have system 1 or type 1 thinking, system 2. Type 1 is intuitive, it's instinctive, it's your gut reaction. It doesn't actually happen in your gut, but it is your gut reaction. It's why we get simple mathematical questions wrong all the time. I'm going to write up a couple of things. I don't want anybody to think about the answer to any of these, okay? I just want you to write down the first answer that comes into your head. Okay, bat and ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more how much does the law cost? Write a number down now. Don't think about it, write a number down. Have you written the number down?
I already solved this
Okay.
yesterday or...
Okay, that's fine. Some of you have already seen it. Those of you that haven't, just write a number down. Put your hand up if you write down 10 cents. Lots of people do. You know it's wrong, right?
Right.
Once you take 2 minutes, you can easily see that the answer isn't 10 cents. Because if the answer is 10 cents, the total would be?
120.
Exactly. So the answer is? 95 cents. Oh, sorry, the bat costs 95 cents. Yeah. I should have put how much is the bat, not how much.
95, but $1.05. $1.05.
$1.05 and yeah, that's right. So it's $1.05. There are lots of these that psychologists use to check whether people are thinking intuitively or not. I'm not going to write the next one down, I want you to listen very, very carefully to it. If it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to produce 100 examples of a product, how long will it take 100 machines to produce 100 examples of the product?
4 minutes.
Why?
Divided by 5, divided by 5 again. One, the number of minutes and the number of machines. 1 minute and a quarter.
Anyone else? Write it down as I'm saying it to you now. It takes 5 machines, 5 minutes to produce 100 Takes 5 machines, 5 minutes to produce 100 examples of the product. How long will it take 100 machines to produce 100 examples of the product?
12.
The math isn't that hard. But the intuitive answers are usually always wrong. Because we don't do maths intuitively. Very few people do. The ones that do, we tend to call geniuses. But what it means is they're simply exposed to these things so often that it becomes intuition. Okay, it's a very, very simple equation. You've simply got to divide 5 minutes by 20. Because you're multiplying the number of machines by 20, so it takes a 20th of the time. That's all it is. This is my favourite one. There is a patch of lily pads in a lake. And each day, the lily pads double in size, covering twice the area of the lake. If it takes 48 days to cover the entire lake, how long does it take to cover a quarter of the lake?
46.
Good, good. Everybody get why that is? We think a quarter is much smaller, but if you're doubling every day, you've only got to go 1 day to a half and 1 day to completely covering the lake. But everybody thinks, oh, quarter of 48 days. Intuitively, we get the answer wrong, because system 1 thinking is quick. System 2 thinking is reflective. When our audiences are distracted, that is already putting cognitive strain on their efforts. If there is already cognitive strain on their efforts to receive the information, they won't invest the cognitive strain necessary to analyse the information. And if they doubt it, they'll just dismiss it. People do that all the time. We dismiss data that doesn't correlate to what we think we already know. It's what scientists call the confirmation bias. We seek out data that does conform to what we think we know. We have pattern bias. We see patterns where none perhaps exist. Or we become convinced of a pattern and won't believe anything else. A good example of that, I'm going to write down a series of 4 numbers on the board. So can I just get a time check? I don't want it to go on too long. We attend to, yeah?
1552.
Alright, this is going to be the last thing I do then. I'm going to write down a series of 4 numbers on the board. They conform to a pattern. I want you to write down a different series of 4 numbers that you think might also conform to the same pattern. I want you to tell me what that is. I will say yes or I will say no. Based on whether I say yes or no, I want you to tell me what my pattern is. Does that make sense? Okay, write down your own 4-number string. What's your 4-number string?
1357.
Yep, that conforms to my pattern. Do you want to guess my pattern?
One digit number? One digit number? Like not 10 or
No, not my pattern. Do Do you have one number string?
15, 18, 20, 22.
Yep, that conforms. Do you want to guess my pattern?
That's plus 2.
That's not my pattern. Anyone else? Somebody give me a different string. Whose string increases by 2? Put your hand up. So you all already think you know what my pattern is then. Because you've all decided that its number's increasing by 2. It's actually just numbers getting bigger. Right? That's my pattern. And the only way you're going to find that is by giving me a string and numbers get smaller. You were all looking for me to say yes, that conforms, because you wanted to have the right answer. By getting a no, you would discover much more quickly what my pattern is. When we seek out ways of disagreeing to provoke System 2 thinking into analysis, we reach better decisions. But our body language, our style of speaking, needs to be such that it allows people to engage in that type of thinking. If it doesn't, if it's a distraction, it pulls attention away from our content, and the cognitive strain becomes too much and people just give up. They dismiss what we say. Not a very good idea for you as educators. So practice on your own those things that you know and you will know them best that you think might be distracting the judges. Ask your partner, is there anything I do that kind of annoys you when I'm speaking? Videotape yourselves back at college. Watch yourselves. It's a horrible experience, but do it. Okay? Record yourselves on audio tapes to listen to the verbal repetition, the words you overuse without really meaning to. Unconscious tics. Don't try and eliminate them altogether. You'll become very, very nervous. And some of them you might need to keep. Work on one or two. Modify it gently. When you've got that down, work on something else. Become confident naturally, and you will become very stylish speakers. Thanks very much.